All right, welcome back to another Thursday, another video, completely raw format, no cuts, no edits like usual. And in this video today, I'm going to be taking you through how you can transform your boring task, your work task, into something that's a lot more rewarding and feels like scrolling, feels like these high reward, instant gratification activities. So yeah, it's going to be about focus. I know there's a lot of words being thrown around out there like flow, state, and dopamine detox and these things. The way we're going to look at it is we're just going to look at some very practical ways that I have experienced and I've talked with people about how you can actually make your tendency towards the boring task a lot more easy. So if you're sitting out there and having that, like knowing what tasks you need to do, but it's still being difficult because your sensitivity towards dopamine is very low, and you actually need these high stimulating activities for you, high rewarding activities to actually be stimulated. This is a video for you, right? So we're just going to be taking it very simply through a few steps when wanting to lower that reward system, the sensitivity. Because when we're talking dopamine and rewards, I like to look at it from a standpoint of not detoxing your dopamine. I don't think that's actually possible neurologically, but I like to look at it from a standpoint of actually lowering or calibrating your sensitivity towards reward. So this is something I've heard a few creators talk about, which actually just means that instead of having a very low sensitivity towards rewards and stimulation, you have a very high sensitivity, meaning that you're going to be able to do a lot more boring, quote unquote, boring tasks without it actually being boring, because you're going to be lowering your sensitivity, or you're going to be having a higher sensitivity towards tasks, and therefore it's going to stimulate you enough, reward you enough for you to find satisfaction in doing them on a daily basis, right? So the first step towards this is analyzing how you take breaks, right? Because this is something I've done way too much when taking breaks, is that we'll take breaks in between work blocks or whatever you do in your day-to-day life of focused work, and we'll go straight into very high rewarding activities, right? So in between deep work blocks, I would have maybe scrolled or read the news or done something that was a lot higher reward or instant gratification kind of dopamine fix than the actual work. And this is a big mistake, because what you want to do with your breaks in between work is you want to do something really, really boring, right? You want to do something that's more boring than the work itself. So if you're in a work block and you're doing some very deep work focused tasks, the way to actually find pleasure in them is by, when not doing work, doing something that's even more boring. And it sounds a bit counterintuitive, and obviously you gotta have time for yourself where you can do whatever you want and these things. But when you're in those focused days of work, I would heavily suggest that you prioritize your breaks being very simple stuff, right? So instead of scrolling or watching TV or even watching the news or reading the news, just simply sit and relax, right? Maybe go for a walk, maybe just stare into a wall, right? At least if you're coming from a perspective of having a very, very low sensitivity to dopamine and therefore finding it hard to do the work you have to do, resetting or calibrating your sensitivity actually means doing very, very boring things. Isolating yourself, not speaking to someone on the phone, not going out and taking something to eat necessarily just because you want to have that dopamine. Obviously, if you need to eat, you need to eat, but just sitting there very, very calmly, prioritizing your breath, looking into a wall, going for a walk, doing something that's less high rewarding than the work you're doing, right? So if you're sitting in a work block and you're doing copywriting or service delivery or outreaches or whatever, you need to be doing something in your breaks that then gives you energy to go back to work, right? Because if you go off work and you start scrolling and you start reading the news, you're going to be less energized to get back to work, right? If you're studying for long periods of time and then you're scrolling an hour, and then you don't want to get back to studying because your brain is now being calibrated towards that higher level of reward, and therefore your sensitivity is lowered, right? So that'll be the first thing. Analyze your breaks. Analyze not only your breaks in your day-to-day life, but also your breaks in the weekends. Personally, I have a day of complete rest in my work week where I don't go and scroll the entire day, because that would mess up my sensitivity when I get back into the next week, but simply just doing very simple tasks, doing something that's quote unquote boring, but resting and not resting and telling yourself that rest is scrolling, right? Because it's truly not. From a neurological perspective, you're not resting when you're in that heightened level of instant gratification. So analyze your breaks, and also analyze the moments in between, right? What I mean with the moments in between is that typically everyone has a reaction of when you're standing in a queue, or let's say you're going to a lunch meeting and you're a bit early. People are just going to whip out their phone, check their text, right? Scroll a bit on social media. This is a massive mistake, and you would actually be doing yourself a massive favor by simply just sitting in the moment and allowing yourself just to relax, because you would actually start to change your brain towards finding more pleasure in the actual meeting or in the actual process of doing the work or going to the meeting or whatever, by actually just in between these things like being in the queue, being in public transport. Just be in public transport, maybe read a book or whatever, but just very, very calmly focus on your breath and reset your sensitivity, calibrate it towards the work, right? This is obviously over a long period of time, and you have therefore to not look at dopamine like a detox, but look at the detox as calibrating your sensitivity, as we've been talking about, right? The third thing I would really heavily suggest people to do to really start making their work feel like scrolling or make it rewarding also in the short term, so you can practice consistency, is that you do one thing at the time, right? A lot of people will do multiple things at the time, but in turn, actually, that is going to damage your ability to switch in between tasks, because you're always getting stimulated from more than one place at the time, right? So when you're eating, just eat. When you're having a conversation, just convert, right? Don't be doing multiple things at a time, watching or working while you're eating, or reading while you're listening to music, or running while you're listening to music or a podcast. If you're really looking to heighten your sensitivity towards the dopamine you'll get from working, it's about lowering it everywhere else, simply put, right? So analyze where in your life that you're either doing multiple things at once, or analyze the way you're taking breaks, the way you're taking rest days. Are you actually resting, or are you just, doing something that releases high energy and high level of reward, therefore making your work at the beginning of the week more boring, because now you've trained your brain, this is the standard. You want to lower your standard, and in that way higher your sensitivity. So you heighten your sensitivity by lowering your standard of where you get dopamine from. Analyze your sources of dopamine, analyze your environment, and then you'll start to have this monk-like flow state, right? There's a lot of different ways that people talk about flow state, but for me, it's just the ability to really focus in on a task that I'm doing. And I won't be able to focus in on a task which is necessarily a bit more boring when my brain is always hungry for a higher level of dopamine, right? High level of scrolling or YouTube or whatever it might be. So analyze that in your life, and then just change a few things out. Analyze how you're taking breaks in between moments to really make your work feel like scrolling, right? This is the key to actually building consistent reward systems through the work you're doing, through the boring work. And imagine what a competitive edge it is to make your work feel like play compared to other people that are fighting themselves through these work blocks, because they're training their brain in their breaks, in their moments in between public transport or in queues at work or whatever. They're training their brain just to go straight to their phone, and that's going to be their standard, right? So their sensitivity towards dopamine or rewards are very, 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 very low. You want your brain to find a lot more reward in the boring stuff, so your sensitivity must be higher. Therefore, you must start cutting out some of those sources of a heightened reward, and that will also increase your ability to delay gratification. Delay. You delay gratification for long enough time, the biggest rewards will come. So yeah, I think that's the 3 ways I would really look at increasing your focus in the work you're doing. So, and making it feel a lot more like play, right? Which is going to make you a lot more competitive in the space. So the 3 things, just to sum them up, was first and foremost, analyzing the way you take breaks, not only on a daily basis, but also on a weekly basis. What are you actually doing in your breaks? Are you doing something that has a higher reward propensity than the work you're doing? If so, you got to change that very quickly. Start by just sitting, looking into a wall, going for a walk, doing something really, really boring, so your brain gets fired up to go back into work, right? If you're doing something that has high energy, your higher levels of reward, you're not going to be as fired up to get back into work, obviously. Second thing being just really owning the moments in between. So public transport, standing in queues, being early for a meeting. Instead of just going for your phone, just sit there, focus on your breath, relax, be in the moment. And then third and foremost, do one thing at a time, right? When you're eating, eat. When you're talking, just talk. When you're in a meeting, just be in a meeting. When you're watching something, just watch something. Don't be doing multiple things at the time, because that will also hurt your ability to be able to focus on one task specifically. All right, that's the 3 things I would focus on when it comes to focus. I hope that this video has provided some sort of insight onto how you can make your work, your boring work, feel more like play. Again, if there's anything else that you guys and girls want me to cover, at the moment I'm just bringing thoughts and learnings from my personal life and my business life, obviously, but please let me know, and I'm more than happy to analyze that feedback loop and get that from you guys. So yeah, I appreciate you guys watching along. Stay tuned for another video next week, and have an amazing rest of your week. Take care.